Hi everybody, my name is Niamh Brophy and I'm going to speak with you today about homelessness and palliative care. I'm the Homeless Palliative Care Coordinator here at St Anne's, and I'll share with you just a little bit of background about the issue in general, and then I'll share with you a little bit about how we work with the homeless here at St Anne's. First of all, what do we mean by homelessness? You may see the very visible end of homelessness in somebody sleeping rough. You may see somebody bedding down on the street in a doorway or in tents. But it's important to remember that for every one person you see sleeping rough, there is 14 other what we call hidden homeless. That's people that are not as visible, but are, say, staying in a hostel. They might be living in a squat, sofa surfing with friends, or just generally insecurely housed in temporary accommodation. We would consider all of these people to be homeless for the purpose of our service. It's also important to consider what people's routes are into homelessness. This is important to be mindful of if you are trying to support somebody at any stage of their journey, but particularly if somebody has palliative care needs, and they could be in the last year of life. So although everybody's story is unique, you can broadly group them into three separate causes or vulnerabilities. The first would be events in childhood, and we will include in that anybody who's experienced neglect or abuse. There is a very, very strong link between the source of trauma and homelessness later on in life. But we know that people who have parents who were in prison, parents who perhaps were mentally unwell themselves or suffered from their own addictions, or even just being in a family home that had domestic violence within it. All of these would be events in childhood that would be quite traumatic and have strong, strong links to somebody becoming homeless later in life. But there are also some individual vulnerabilities that may be a cause and consequence of these events in childhood, or could develop separately. People suffer often from mental ill health. This theme of loss and relationship breakdown is a common one in the stories and that you hear when people and why they've become homeless. People fleeing domestic violence, leaving prison, perhaps, and not having any support or anybody to depend on. They often will present to the council as homeless after leaving prison or leaving care, or people who struggle with addictions that often can result in somebody becoming homeless. As well as these individual vulnerabilities, we have quite structural causes that we may be even more particularly aware of, given the pandemic and the impact that's had on unemployment, poverty, inequality, housing prices, increasing rent prices, but also housing supply. All of this contributes to people being quite insecurely housed and the threat of homelessness being very real. It's important to consider somebody's route into homelessness. Again, we are trying to support them with their experience of where they are at now with palliative care needs. So why is it important to consider palliative care when supporting people who are homeless? We found that people experiencing homelessness for a long time, these are the individuals I have most experience with, are often very physically vulnerable, physically and psychologically vulnerable. We often see the onset of certain illnesses that you'd expect to see in a much older population actually happening much, much earlier in people who were experiencing homelessness, 15 years earlier to be specific. There was other research done looking at a hostel in London recently, where although the average age was 55, the residents there, Dr. Rogers-Watson found that actually they had frailty levels that were comparable to 89-year-olds in the general population. So what I hope is emerging is this real vulnerability and physical need, that often goes unmet. People can often be excluded from services based on their age if they're presenting very young. They may have quite challenging behaviour that mainstream services may struggle with. Or again, if people have continued addictions, they will be excluded from services based on that fact. And so the result is that people often remain in hostels as their health deteriorates. What we call this tri-morbidity is one of the reasons why it can be so difficult and so challenging to support somebody who's experiencing homelessness. And it's often because they each, in one person, you may find these three issues. That's physical ill health, mental ill health, which is often compounded by substance use issues. So this tri-morbidity that we see in a person often make it quite difficult, not for that person to access services appropriately, but also for services to offer the type of support that's appropriate and accessible for that person. So it's a two-way street that's often very challenging. So these complex needs often lead to very heavy symptom burdens, people living with life-limiting conditions, treatable medical conditions as well, but they often struggle to access the care and support needed to address those needs. And so people end up very rarely getting access to palliative care, although they would meet the criteria in spades. They often do not get access to palliative care until very late in their illness, and they often die without accessing good quality end-of-life care. This is a very shocking statistic that the age of death is 46 for men and 43 for women. And we know that although overdoses are common in accidents, the most common cause of death was from treatable medical conditions. I often then ask myself, is it such a stretch to consider homelessness itself a life-limiting condition? I often don't think so. So what's the aim of St Anne's Homeless Palliative Care Service? We have 3 work streams that we focus on. First is case management, so people referred into the hospice who are homeless. We support them through case management. We offer education and training to health, social care and homeless sector staff, and psychosocial support to anybody supporting somebody who's homeless, and that person themselves, of course, who have palliative care needs or who are approaching the end of life. We're grateful to have funding for this project from the Big Lottery for 5 years. Well, I'll just share with you a case study of a gentleman at quite a common sort of presentation of somebody that would be referred into the service. So Michael was only 49. He sadly experienced extensive abuse when he was a child, was placed in care. That abuse actually continued while he was in care. And at the age of 18, when you become an adult and the duty of care is no longer there to support somebody within that care system, Michael almost immediately became homeless. He had never been taught or learned the life skills needed to hold down a job or a tenancy, or even to understand and make sense of the really complex, difficult emotions that he was feeling as a result of his experiences from such a young age. Michael turned to alcohol almost straight away to numb these difficult emotions. He found quite an effective coping mechanism for the situation that he was in. He was bouncing in and out of hostels for his entire adult life, suffered more traumatic events, violence, and relationship breakdowns while he was homeless. And he was referred in to us when he was given a diagnosis of terminal liver cancer. There was a lot of risk around Michael. He was being financially targeted, physically abused because he was quite frail and vulnerable. He was on a higher amount of benefits because of this, and he was therefore targeted for that money as well. And he didn't really have contact with his family either. So how we approached working with Michael, we were fortunate to get a referral quite early on in his illness That enabled us to have time to build up some trust, to be consistent with him, to offer continuity of care. We worked to build a relationship with Michael, but also to build a relationship with all the people around him that were important to him. His key worker in the hostel, his drug and alcohol worker, his nurse in the hospital that he was getting treatment from. And we worked in this parallel planning approach that enabled us to work with uncertainty, but also support somebody who is quite vulnerable. And that's the idea of having conversations around ill health, hoping for the best, but at the same time, we will be planning for the worst. We face quite a lot of challenges with Michael that are coming up on the screen now. But by working together, working collaboratively with the hostel, with the nurses, with the drug and alcohol and the mental health team, we were able to address all of these challenges individually. And by addressing them early and anticipating them, we overcame them, which had a really positive outcome for Michael and enabled some of his wishes to be honoured, which probably otherwise would not have been able to happen. So the outcome for Michael was positive in the sense that he reconnected with his family that he had lost touch with quite some time ago. He wanted to stay in the hostel that he was living in because he felt very comfortable and safe there. It was where he considered his home. By having discussions with Michael over time, we could identify what his wishes were and we could work to honour them. We also supported the staff through offering training around palliative care needs and what's going to happen, how to have difficult conversations with Michael. And that enabled his quality of care to improve. And we were very, very fortunate and happy that it also enabled us to plan for Michael to be transferred when the time came to a hospice that was close to his family, so that they could visit him and be with him when he died, which they did. Some other aims of the Homeless Palliative Care Service we've addressed through that case study, but it's really around increasing the knowledge and confidence of people to work with somebody experiencing homelessness. There might be a lot of anxiety and stress and worry when you're dealing with somebody with quite complex needs, so we aim to address those through our training and education modules. We try to meet people earlier in their illness so that we can build up trust and build up a relationship with them, to be able to work with everybody involved in that person's care, and to increase the likelihood that people's choices and wishes will be honoured, including where they want to be cared for and including where they want to die, even if that is the hostel. We do challenge a lot of inequalities that people experience. We advocate for people's rights and their entitlements to good quality care and support. And we do this with the ultimate aim of ensuring that people have support in a way and in a form that is accessible to them, that they are respected in their choices, and that they can approach the end of their life with dignity and with respect. I've put up here some additional links and resources that I hope will be helpful, including things like how to report a rough sleeper if you see them on the streets. Let's report them to our outreach team so they can go out to offer support to them. And other issues, links and resources on homelessness, health, inclusion health and palliative care, which is all up there as well. Thank you so much for listening. I hope this was useful and interesting for you.